The unitary executive theory goes like this. The president has complete command and control. Trump has set it up for himself with the backing of a supermajority of the Supreme Court, 3 of whom he appointed, to basically get away with murder and control the entire government. And they're doing that with the Vengeance Project 2025, the cabinet nominees, and also a very dangerous development that is going to enable Trump to really consolidate power and neutralize and go after his perceived enemies, anybody who opposes him. It's more important than ever that we organize, that we speak out. It's not the time to give up. It's the time to redouble our efforts to organize and struggle and fight back.
Welcome to episode 230 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism exposes, analyzes, and stands against the very real danger and threat of fascism coming to power in the United States. Today, we're sharing an interview with legal scholar and political analyst Marjorie Cohn, discussing how Trump is leveraging quote-unquote unitary executive theory in pursuit of unchecked authority and its implications. I want to thank our patrons, our sustainers who make this show possible. If you want to join our community, you can do so at patreon.com/refusefascism. We'd love to have you with us. Thanks to everyone who rates and reviews the show on Apple Podcast or their listening platform of choice. It boosts the show so much. So please, after listening to today's episode, of course, give us a great rating and review. Thanks to those who share the show, whether you share it through your listening app or posting on social media or just talking with friends and family about it. It makes a difference in growing this audience. And thank you to everyone who buys our merch to support and spread the show. We have hoodies and t-shirts. See the show notes to get yours. I want to share one comment that we got off of last week's episode, Gender Liberation, Radical Defiance, and the Power of Street Art. We received this comment on the YouTubes. We do read all your comments. And this came from @Sabrina Locrian. And she wrote, 2 really great guests. As a transgender woman, I need to know there are activists out there that understand the seriousness of our present situation. I needed this kick in the ass to get out the door and fight the fascists. Well, Sabrina, I'm so glad that did that for you. We all need that kick in the butt. So glad to have you with us. And if you are looking for a last-minute gift that requires no wrapping, give friends and family the gift of access to the Refuse Fascism podcast Patreon community. You can gift up to 1 year of membership. Do so today at patreon.com/refusefascism/gift. Next week, we will be sharing our year in review episode. We've had some extraordinary conversations this year that are more and more relevant with each passing day. But this week, we're going to keep it simple and just talk about one overarching theme before we get to our interview with Marjorie. And that theme is capitulation. Capitulation in the face of fascism's ascent to the most powerful and dangerous state power in the world. This week, today, right now, we're going to talk in particular about the sometimes groveling, sometimes enthusiastic capitulation of the elite, of the politicians, the media moguls, the self-proclaimed visionaries of Silicon Valley, the quote-unquote job creators, and billionaire CEOs and financiers, why it's happening, and what it should tell us.
One of the big differences between the first term, in the first term, everybody was fighting me. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. I don't know.
This week, Michelle Goldberg wrote in her op-ed for the New York Times, quote, Since Trump won re-election, this time with the popular vote, many of the most influential people in America seem to have lost any will to stand up to him as he goes about transforming America into the sort of authoritarian oligarchy he admires. Call it the Great Capitulation, end quote. Okay, Michelle, we will. It certainly fits. During Trump's first term, most of these people that we're going to get into remained, at least publicly, aloof and removed from the MAGA mob and the fascist program. Beholden to the status quo of empire, many expressed concerns about Trump's disregard for norms, lucrative allies, and trade agreements, and the rule of law. Some were heavily involved with funding the Democratic Party's opposition. Some rebuffed Trump's invitations. Many expressed outrage surrounding Trump's attempted coup, but no more. In Silicon Valley, we have seen Mark Zuckerberg and OpenAI CEO Sam Altman donate $1 million each to Trump's inauguration. Zuckerberg and Altman, along with Tim Cook of Apple, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and Sergey Brin of Google, have all gone to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump and kiss the ring. Not to mention Peter Thiel, who was already all in, and of course, incoming co-president Elon Musk. Meanwhile, Mark Benioff, the chair and CEO of Salesforce and the owner of Time magazine, exclaimed on X that Trump's election, quote, marks a time of great promise for our nation, end quote, after his magazine coronated Trump as their Person of the Year. Patrick Soon-Shiong, the owner of the Los Angeles Times, pulled the plug on a major piece from his paper's editorial board criticizing Trump's cabinet picks and urging the Senate to block Trump's intention to circumvent their power and make recess appointments. Soon-Shiong, a biotech and pharmaceutical billionaire, declared his intention to personally oversee all the paper's editorials, to have the paper, quote unquote, take a break from writing about Trump, to pair any article or editorial critical of Trump with at least one piece offering an opposing view, and plans to introduce an AI-powered, quote unquote, bias meter. In an apparent ode to Fox News, he wants the paper to become more, quote unquote, fair and balanced, as he criticizes the management for moving too far left. Meanwhile, ABC cravenly settled a legally frivolous lawsuit Trump filed against them over George Stephanopoulos' factual assertion that Trump raped E. Jean Carroll, an assertion supported by the judge who ruled in that case. The Wall Street Journal hosted Trump's senior advisor, Jason Miller, at their CEO Council, where he reached out to put even more CEOs in direct contact with the president-elect. Senior executives from Visa, Goldman Sachs, Charles Schwab, and Citadel joined Trump in the New York Stock Exchange, mindlessly applauding the ridiculous leader of Trump ringing the opening bell. Unhinged aerospace mogul Robert Bigelow and billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman were also in attendance. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase is saying that he's hopeful that Trump's win will result in less red tape, and was quoted saying that, quote, a lot of bankers, they're like dancing in the street, end quote. Hedge fund billionaire Ken Griffin has also pledged $1 million towards Trump's inauguration. Trump's appointments to lead Treasury and Commerce, Scott Bessent and Howard Lutnick, respectively, are both billionaires from the financial sector. While Lutnick's views have been in line with Trump for some time, Scott Bessent's outlook is regarded as much closer to the mainstream of economic theories, described as quote-unquote reasonable and pragmatic by Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, president of the Yale Chief Executive Institute. Bessent, a protege of George Soros of all people, is being presented as a solve for the financial sector's concerns, some kind of sign that Trump isn't all crazy, or that he'll at least bend to reason on economic issues. According to CNN, Sonnenfeld said, quote, the hope of corporate America is that Bessent can moderate some of Trump's more aggressive campaign promises, end quote. But much more than a check on Trump, this is a sign that the mainstream of the finance sector sees a place for themselves in Trump's fascist future. It is true that to a significant degree, for the ruling class, fascism is a matter of taste, but at the same time, what we are seeing is not par for the course. As much as disruption has been a buzzword in business circles, the kinds of disruptions that Trump is promising will likely upend significant sectors of the economy, with consequences that may not be as easy to voice off onto the masses at large. This does threaten the proverbial billionaire's yacht money. The fact that these titans of exploitation are seeing a political home in Trump's world is a sign of increasing recognition of an empire in crisis, of the impossibility for their system to remain on course, and an increased willingness to jettison the norms and forms of rule that have maintained the system for decades, in some ways, centuries. Then there is the Great Capitulation from the public sector, those who currently or formerly occupy government positions, including politicians. There was, of course, Jack Smith dropping the election subversion and classified document cases against Trump just a few weeks ago. FBI Director Christopher Wray's preemptive resignation, compliantly handing Trump the keys on request, surrendering in advance. Obama, the truly masterful fascism enabler that he is, leading people to look for ways to compromise and engage with Republic-fascists, quote unquote, if they want democracy to survive. Telling his Chicago audience in his first post-election speech to, quote unquote, be down for compromise. Yeah, he actually said that. Because forge alliances and building coalitions with fascists is a winning strategy for the oppressed. We've spoken previously on the show about Biden welcoming Trump to the White House to chat fireside, his pledge to make sure Trump is quote unquote accommodated. Long gone are condemnations of Trump and the existential danger he poses. Harris has become silent on the horrors of Trump, his cabinet appointments, nominations, his revanchist plans and promises. The brief moments of accurately labeling the threat as fascists, merely a distant memory. Biden has thus far refused to put any impediments in the way of Trump's cruel and brutal plan for the future, refusing to extend temporary protective status for those legally present in this country from places like Venezuela, El Salvador, and Haiti, but extending contracts to private immigration jails despite reports of horrific conditions. I spoke last week about the Democratic governors who are willing to work with Trump on immigration. To that, I'll add that you now have Democratic members of the House of Representatives expressing willingness to work with Elon and Vivek on their DOJ effort, as if it were at all a legitimate enterprise. You have U.S. Congressman Jim Clyburn from South Carolina suggesting that Biden pardon Trump for January 6th, and that he should, quote, pardon all of those people that have been accused and who have been targeted so we can clean the slate, end quote. Nancy Pelosi, who has been demonized by Trump, hunted by his goons, whose husband was nearly killed by a deranged maggot, which Trump repeatedly joked about and celebrated, said in a recent New York Times interview referring to Trump, quote, he's the president. We all want the president to succeed. We wanted him to succeed in 2016 until they went down a path that we had to disagree with. But again, let's give this a chance and see where we can find our common ground, end quote. This is similar to the words of Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who said, quote, I know Donald Trump cares about Michigan, and because of that, I hope we'll be able to find some common ground in some important ways, end quote. Consistent with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries' pledge that, quote, Democrats have consistently made clear that we are ready, willing, and able to find bipartisan common ground with the incoming administration on any issue, end quote. Common ground, common ground, common ground. Obama warns that purity tests don't work out over the long term, but that obviously depends on the context because, say, for water safety, purity tests are a life and death necessity. And the fact is that even our most basic water safety is under attack from the fascists trying to strip the EPA for parts. If there is one overarching lesson of the history of the United States, it's that the Union only won the Civil War when they stopped trying to find common ground with Confederates. But for more than 150 years since then, finding common ground with Confederates has been the basis of just about every liberal and left political enterprise in this country. We are watching the political breakdown of the supposed guardrails of democracy and the power of the status quo. The good guy politicians, the titans of industry, even celebrities at the peak of fame and influence, are largely scared to step out of line or speak out of step, or excitedly lining up for Trump's fascist future. But the good news is that none of those people were ever going to lead this fight in a way that could actually defeat fascism. Looking to them for leadership, waiting for them to step out first, will not work and has already proven detrimental to humanity. That doesn't mean that there can't be or won't be resistance, that defeating Trump and these MAGA fascists is impossible. It does mean that defeating fascism will require us, all of us, the tens and tens of millions who can't stand any of what Trump and these fascists represent, taking collective action, waging, as Raquel said last week, radical defiance, putting it on the line so that they can't advance their white supremacist, male supremacist, xenophobic program 1 inch. While those who I've been talking about may be normalizing, accommodating, conciliating, and collaborating, assisting to make things easier for Trump and the MAGA fascists, we mustn't. Fuck no. Will we follow their lead in accepting mass deportations, accepting campaigns of terror, accepting open white supremacy, accepting Christian theocracy that endangers the lives and freedom of women and LGBTQ people? We know that if Trump succeeds, humanity loses. We know that if you work with fascists, you normalize the road to horror. We mustn't wait for the brutality and cruelty unfold. We mustn't allow ourselves to accept the unacceptable or normalize the unthinkable. Sure, people want to rest up the next few days. Let's do it. We have a fight to prepare for. But don't pretend that we can wait and see. And don't think for a minute that we've seen anything like the fight that needs to happen, the struggle we need to wage. Not in this country. Fascism is truly on the march. Lastly, before we run the interview, we want to give a huge shout out to all those who organized and showed up for actions across the country for International Migrants Day. Here in Philly, giving love to the people who, led by Pennsylvania Immigrant Coalition, put their bodies on the line and blocked the Ben Franklin Bridge, chanting "All power to the people, no human is illegal." Amongst other actions, in LA, hundreds took to the streets. This needs to turn into a mass movement fast, bringing together people from all walks of life and all different backgrounds against Trump's efforts at ethnic cleansing through his mass deportation plot, to defeat his attempts to round up, lock up, and throw out millions of our immigrant siblings, and defeat this fascist onslaught in the name of humanity. With that, here is my interview with Marjorie Cohn. In approximately 1 month, Trump will return to the White House. Trump and his allies have taken a series of actions signaling their intention to dangerously consolidate executive power under the contentious, quote-unquote, unitary executive theory of the Constitution, to discuss how Trump and company are leveraging unitary executive theory in pursuit of really unchecked authority and its implications. I am so honored to be speaking with Marjorie Cohn. Marjorie is Professor Emerita at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, Dean of the People's Academy of International Law, and past president of the National Lawyers Guild. She sits on the national advisory boards of Veterans for Peace and Assange Defense, and is the U.S. representative to the Continental Advisory Council of the Association of American Jurists. Her books include The United States in Torture, Interrogation, Incarceration and Abuse, and Drones and Targeted Killing, Legal, Moral, and Geopolitical Issues. In a recent article, Trump is using unitary executive theory in his bid to amass supreme power, published on Truth Out earlier this month. She lays out how Project 2025 contains several ways in which Trump could undermine the constitutional checks and balances, including curtailing the independence of independent agencies, weaponizing the Department of Justice to serve Trump's political agenda, replacing civil servants with political supporters, impounding funds Congress has appropriated and using them for other purposes, neutralizing the press and independent media, misapplying the Insurrection Act to suppress protests and deport undocumented immigrants, misusing the recess appointment process to confirm executive branch nominees without Senate approval, and deconstructing the administrative state to help corporations maximize profit. I'm so glad to welcome Marjorie. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
I guess the best place to start is our understanding of what unitary executive theory is. The President of the United States has often been called the most powerful person on the planet, the leader of the free world, etc. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what is the theory of the unitary executive and how does it go beyond the normal understanding of president as the head of government or even as the head of empire?
The unitary executive theory goes like this. The executive branch is unitary. The president has complete command and control over it. The unitary executive theory has its roots in the imperial presidency during the Civil War and reached its zenith during the Richard Nixon administration. President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus without congressional authorization. And of course, Richard Nixon, who resigned because of the Watergate scandal, said, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal. Now, Scalia wrote a dissent. He was the only one which said that the vesting clause, which is Article 2 of the Constitution, does not mean some of the executive power, but all of the executive power. And the vesting clause says the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. During the Bush administration, you remember that infamous John Yoo, author of the infamous torture memos, and he made the unitary executive a central focus of the Bush presidency. He said in an interview with the New Yorker that Congress could not prevent the president from ordering torture, even though clearly under international executive and U.S. law, torture is prohibited in all instances. And when he was asked if any law prohibited the president from crushing the testicles of the child of a person being interrogated, instead of saying absolutely not, that there was no such law, he said, this is John Yoo, I think it depends on why the president thinks he needs to do that. So what John Yoo did was to insert the phrase unitary executive into every single signing statement that when Bush signed a law that Congress had passed, basically, he said, I reserve the right not to follow those parts of the law that I don't agree with, elevating himself above Congress, which is one of the three co-equal branches of government. And just a note to talk about the second part of your question, the framers of the Constitution put three co-equal branches of government into the Constitution to check and balance each other. Legislative, which is Congress, judicial, which is the courts, and executive, which we're talking about now. Congress makes the laws, the courts interpret them, and under the take care clause of the Constitution, the president's job, mandatory job, is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And yet the unitary executive elevates the president really above Congress. And Samuel Alito, he's another one of the members of the Supreme Court. I don't call them justices. I don't think there is anything just about them. At his Supreme Court confirmation hearing in 2006, Samuel Alito told the Senate Judiciary Committee, the concept of unitary executive doesn't have to do with the scope of executive power. It has to do with who within the executive branch controls the exercise of executive power. And the theory is that the Constitution says the executive power is conferred upon the president. Now, during the first Trump administration, Bill Barr, who apparently was trying to get Trump to appoint him Attorney General, wrote a long memo in 2018 criticizing Robert Mueller, the special counsel's investigation of Trump. And Barr wrote that the president has total control over the executive branch. He said, constitutionally, it is wrong to conceive of the president as simply the highest officer within the executive branch hierarchy. He alone is the executive branch, and he is the sole repository of all executive powers confirmed by the Constitution. Now, two other members of the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, both subscribe to the unitary executive theory. Basically, proponents of the unitary executive say that Article 2 of the Constitution establishes a hierarchical, unified executive department under the direct control of the president, who alone possesses all of the executive power and therefore can direct, control, and supervise inferior officers or agencies who seek to exercise discretionary executive power. When the Supreme Court in the last term decided that a president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for core constitutional functions and presumptive immunity, that is, there's a presumption that he has immunity for all other official functions, and it's almost impossible to find any function that's not official. The Supreme Court was basically telling Donald Trump he could do whatever he wants. And the Supreme Court also decided a very dangerous case where they eliminated the so-called Chevron doctrine, which said that where there's an ambiguous statute that Congress had passed, instead of the experts in the particular agency who are best equipped to resolve that ambiguity, now the courts would do that, would take that away from these experts. And of course, many of the courts are stacked with Trump appointees. So Trump has set it up for himself with the backing of a supermajority of the Supreme Court, 3 of whom he appointed, 3 of the 6 right-wing zealots on the Supreme Court, to basically get away with murder and control the entire government.
Thanks for that. I really appreciated both the taking us through how this theory has evolved in practice all the way up to that ominous Supreme Court decision last term, and also how this theory has been used over the last 50 years. It really gives us a sense of now what that might look like in Trump's hands. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how this unitary executive theory threatens, or could threaten, I should say, the system of checks and balances in the U.S. government with Trump reascending to power.
Well, let me just say, Sam, just a few words about Project 2025, which is basically a radical right-wing blueprint for a fascist government. And it's about 920 pages. And I don't know if I would actually encourage people to read it because it's awfully depressing. But it's really a roadmap to an imperial presidency. According to the Center for American Progress, this radical governing philosophy, which contravenes the traditional separation of powers, that's the 3 branches of government, vests presidents with almost complete control over the federal bureaucracy, including congressionally designated independent agencies or the Department of Justice or the FBI. The unitary executive theory is designed to sharply diminish Congress's imperative role to act as a check and balance on the executive branch with tools such as setting up independent agencies to make expert decisions and by limiting president's ability to fire career civil servants for purely political purposes. Now, according to Project 2025, Trump would circumvent Congress by taking complete control of all of the administrative agencies that protect our health, safety, food, water, and climate, in addition to the rights of labor. One of the really frightening things about Project 2025 is Schedule F. Now, Trump instituted Schedule F during his first term. One of the first things that Biden did was to basically get rid of Schedule F. Schedule F would reclassify 50,000 of the 2 million merit-based civil service federal employees and make them political appointees to serve at the pleasure of the president with no civil service protection. Basically just loyalty to Trump, which of course he prides more than anything. And let me just say a word about his cabinet nominees, which...
That's what I was going to say. They're a great example of that loyalty oath.
Right. One of the things I should say about Project 2025 is people like me and many other people were sounding the alarm about it. And Trump, before the election, said, I don't even know what it is. I had nothing to do with it. I like parts of it. Of course, he contradicts himself in the same sentence. Didn't seem to hurt him in the election. But he distanced himself from Project 2025. But lo and behold, his cabinet picks were authors and influencers of Project 2025. Once again, he has tapped Russell Vought, who is president of the Center for Renewing America, as director of the Office of Management and Budget, a very, very powerful cabinet position. Vought oversaw Project 2025's section on expanding executive power. Brendan Carr, who wrote Project 2025's chapter on the Federal Communications Commission, is Trump's pick to chair the FCC. Carr has pledged to retaliate against media organizations that criticized Trump during the election campaign. Tom Homan will be Trump's new border czar. Immigration hawk Stephen Miller, that infamous Stephen Miller, will serve as deputy chief of policy. John Ratcliffe is Trump's pick to be CIA director, and Peter Hoekstra will be ambassador to Canada. All of them are associated with Project 2025.
It's such an important reminder. Thanks for lifting that back up. And I think a lot of what you're speaking to me, is really powerful reminder that we're not just talking about, with Trump coming back to power, more of the same. And I think that there's a little bit too much, we've survived it before, we'll survive it again, no matter how morally bankrupt I think that is, because many did not survive COVID or did not survive family separation. But to think that we're just dealing with more of the same, that this is just Trump 2.0, negates a lot of what you're bringing to light about both who he surrounded himself with and the game plan that they're working on to consolidate power in a much different, more vast way than they were able to their first go around.
Yes, all the stops are out now. When Trump came into office the first time, it was kind of chaotic. They weren't really prepared for it. Now they've had almost 4 years to really get their ducks in a row, so to speak. And they're doing that with a vengeance. Project 2025, the cabinet nominees, and also a very dangerous development that is going to enable Trump to really consolidate power and neutralize and go after his perceived enemies, anybody who opposes him, is a bill called the Nonprofit Killer Bill. It would empower the Secretary of Treasury to designate any nonprofit group as a terrorist supporting organization and revoke its tax-exempt status, effectively shutting it down with no due process. The House of Representatives have already passed the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act, H.R. 9495, and it will likely be reintroduced and passed by the new Congress when the Republicans have both houses of Congress. And although it is aimed primarily at organizations that support the struggle of the Palestinian people, this legislation could be utilized to shutter any group that counters or opposes Trump's policy. Representative Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat from Texas, said on MSNBC, "This bill is not about terrorism. It's about giving Donald Trump unlimited authority to label his opponents as terrorists." That means journalists. That means Republicans on the January 6th committee. It means anybody who countered Trump or opposed his policies. It's one of the most frightening developments that we have seen so far.
Truly, it is. In your piece that inspired this conversation, I think you wrote it as if this passes, it's a unitary executive theory on steroids in terms of how significant this is. And it's very important that people pay attention to it. One question that I think it would be good to hear from you on is, how might this consolidation of power under the executive branch affect civil liberties beyond the democratic norms that you've spoke to, it breaking down? What other implications for the rights of people might we see, in addition to what you're talking about in terms of the ability to protest, basically, or to speak out against Trump?
Well, of course, we've seen so much opposition to Israel's U.S.-backed genocide at campuses all over the country, and now they have gotten their ducks in a row over the summer, and they are already cracking down on protest. And of course, Trump is very supportive of that. But the ramifications are endless, and one of the chief rights in the Constitution is the right to vote. And Trump has said, first of all, he said he wants a unified Reich, which harkens back to Hitler's Third Reich, and he evidently loves Hitler. He has a copy of Mein Kampf by his bed. But he has also said, just vote for me this one time, it will be the last time you have to vote. The implication being that there won't be any more elections, that Trump can be a dictator for life. This is fascism, pure and simple, and I know that that term is thrown around a lot, but we have not seen anything in this country that approaches fascism in the way that this Trump presidency portends. And I have to say, it's very frightening. I have so many friends and colleagues who are depressed, who are thinking of leaving the country. And I just remind them about what Joe Hill said: don't mourn, organize. It's more important than ever that we organize, that we speak out, that we write our Congress members who do respond to pressure, that we write op-eds, that we write letters to the editor. And letters to the editor are not hard to get published. You just peg them to a news story or an opinion piece, keep them under about 150 words. And if your letter doesn't get published, it will help other letters from the same perspective get published, because they count up how many there are on each side. It does sound like doom and gloom, but it's not the time to give up. It's the time to redouble our efforts to organize and struggle and fight back.
I think that's a perfect place to close. I really appreciate your message of stark contrast to the wave that we see of capitulation in the face of this incoming onslaught. And I think that you are absolutely right that this needs to be that we refuse fascism tenfold this time. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective, your expertise, and your insight. And if people want to read more from you, connect more with your work, where do you want to direct people to?
Well, I have a regular column on Truthout, truthout.org. Go to the Truthout page, go all the way to the bottom, and you'll see Human Rights and Global Wrongs. That's the name of my column. You click on that, and you can see the articles that have been published on Truthout. And then my own website, marjoriecohn.com, has collected all of my articles. It has links to my books and also video and radio interviews.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me, and keep up your great work.
Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. We love hearing from you. Connect with us on the socials at Refuse Fascism, including Blue Sky. If you want to reach me, you can do so via Twitter, X. I'm still there at Sam B. Goldman, or you can find me on TikTok at Sam Goldman RF, or you can drop me a line at Samantha Goldman at refusefascism.org. Want to support the show? Well, one way that you can support the show is by getting a t-shirt, sweatshirt, or hoodie, which also spread the imperative. You can see the show notes to get yours. Or if you are able to do more, become a patron for as little as $2 a month over at patreon.com/refusefascism. You can also gift any of our tiers of membership over on Patreon to a loved one who cares about humanity and that you want to connect with this community. You can do that over at patreon.com/refusefascism/gift. It's a no wrapping needed, great last minute gift that shows a lot of heart. Or if you can't commit to giving monthly but want to support the show, for which we are so grateful, please make a one-time end-of-year gift today to enable us to educate broadly, to defend people under attack, to challenge and mobilize the decent folks. Visit refusefascism.org and hit that donate button. You can also give via Venmo, refuse-fascism, or Cash App, Refuse Fascism. Thanks so much to those who've already made an end-year gift, who've signed up as a Patreon, or who've gotten their shirts. We'd love to see pictures of you out and about in the world refusing fascism while wearing your Refuse Fascism sweatshirt. So tag us in your pics. And if you can't give now, don't worry, you can still be part of growing this audience that needs to grow right now. Share the show with others. Rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Comment on your socials or YouTube. It makes a difference and is so appreciated. As always, thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkleman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers. We have transcripts available for each show, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next time, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.